Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar for Guided Pathways Practices for Study Circle Colleges. I'm Jenny Schenker, and on the list of attendees it says that I'm Rhonda Edwards, so don't be confused. Rhonda's not here, but I'm here, and I want to welcome you to the webinar. We're very happy to have Hannah Lahr from the Community College Research Center with us to give us an overview of what the newest and hottest lessons from Guided Pathways, customized for Michigan colleges. So this is really fantastic opportunity for us to hear from Hannah today. I'm going to guess that you all have participated in a GoToWebinar before, but I wanted to remind you that you can enter your questions into the question pane. You can also enter information into the chat, but I will particularly be monitoring the question pane throughout the broadcast so I can make sure that all of your questions get addressed. And I think with if you all could actually just to make sure that this is all coming through okay, if you all could indicate that you hear me by raising your hand using the little hand tool. Here come a bunch of hands up. Okay. This looks pretty good. So if you have any trouble, please feel free to enter it into the chat or the question box, and we'll try to get anything addressed, but it looks like it's going okay. So I am going to go ahead and mute myself and turn it over to Hannah. Good afternoon, Hannah.
Cool, thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Lahr. I'm a Senior Research Associate at the Community College Research Center, and I was really excited when Jenny asked if I could take some time today to talk to you all a little bit about what we're learning about guided pathways. We've been researching how colleges across the country are implementing this institution-wide change for a couple years now. What we focused on for several years was trying to learn more about what these practices look like in practice. So how colleges are designing and adopting some things like meta majors and program maps and redesigned onboarding and advising and all those components of it, and trying to understand what it looks like at different colleges, and how it's going, what challenges they have, and kind of learning a little bit more about the order in which colleges are implementing some of these things. And what we focused on really in the fall was trying to learn more about how colleges are implementing it, so more about the change management process. So today I'm going to start by just sharing a little bit more about the what, and I'm going to focus on what we've learned from two states, Tennessee and Ohio. So I picked those two because one, as you know, Tennessee is a system. There's 13 community colleges, and a lot of the work that they've done has been driven by the Tennessee Board of Regents, and the colleges across the state have implemented a lot of these practices. So things like the co-requisite remediation, the program mapping. Now they're really working on advising and some other things, but they're a system. So that does. They're probably a little bit different than some other states. So then I thought, well, I can also share what we're learning from Ohio, and there you have the Ohio Association of Community Colleges, and they're a little more decentralized. So the OACC and the Student Success Center in Ohio have really led the colleges in implementing a lot of these practices, but at the same time, it's just a different context than in a system. So I thought I'd share a little bit about what the Ohio colleges are doing, and then I turn to talking about how colleges are managing the change process. So again, really focus on organizational change and focusing on how this is all playing out. So focusing on topics like communication and engagement, and how colleges are helping people understand why they're taking on this work, what it's going to entail, how it's going to play out. And we visited 9 colleges in the fall, and we talked to them about how they've managed this change process, and we've learned a lot of interesting lessons. We haven't published anything yet. We're planning to do that in April. So today is kind of my first try at trying to explain some of what we've learned. So just a first stab, and there'll be more to come on this, and we're super excited about it. So I'm just going to dive right in. So as you know, this is a national movement. I'm not going to linger on this too long, but there are, by our count, about 280 colleges across the country that are implementing pathways. So we've worked with a number in many of the states you see here: Washington, California, Texas, Ohio. I know Davis Jenkins has talked to you several times in Michigan, and you've heard from some other people about guided pathways. So there's a lot going on across the country, and the cool thing is every college is sort of doing it differently. This isn't a one-size-fits-all reform, and it means a lot of different things to people when you say guided pathways. So colleges start the reform in different places. So that's kind of one of the cool things, and one of the things we're trying to learn more about and share how this is playing out across the country. So we did release a 3-part packet back in April that focuses on what we're learning. The first part is really how this reform has moved from being this more theoretical thing, guided pathways, we didn't really know what all the parts are, to something that's more practical and breaking that down. The second part had some case studies from 3 colleges on how they're approaching this work. And the third part as a timeline and tips for implementing pathways reform. So I'm going to return to this timeline a little bit later today to talk about how it can be used, how you might want to think about using it at your college to kind of pause and reflect and take stock of what you've done while also trying to plan out what comes next. So some of the model practices, these are probably not a surprise to any of you, but what we have learned is that there are some practices that are bigger and probably more important than some of the other ones that you see on the scale of adoption assessment, which you're going to be asked to take again this spring. A lot of them are connected to each other. So when you're organizing and mapping all your programs by career field or creating meta majors, that's really tied to how you're going to help students explore programs of study and choose a program and develop a plan. Developing that educational plan that's customized to every student is super tied into how you're reorganizing advising and thinking about how you're going to monitor students' progress along that plan. Part of the mapping process is also about thinking about where faculty can embed active, applied, or experiential learning into every program, and ideally into the program pretty early on, so in the first semester or two, to help students get a taste for what this field is like, to see if it's something they're interested in, to kind of give them some momentum moving forward. And again, once programs are mapped and you've developed your onboarding and exploration process, this is a way to connect with high school students and to build these pathways into high school, starting with students in dual enrollment, but really expanding it to all students. All right, so now I'm going to share some of what we're learning from the Tennessee community colleges. As I mentioned, they are a system. There are 13 community colleges. We did write a report on this back in September, summarizing what the colleges are doing. They really started this as a system around 2015, and it's kind of a difficult place to do research because a lot happened at the same time. So in 2015, they started College Promise program, they started mapping, they implemented the co-requisite remediation. So when all those things are happening at one time, it's really hard to disentangle what is having an effect. You've probably seen some of the KPIs or some early outcome data from Tennessee, which shows that they are having some increases in student success. And what we're doing some more research on now is using unit record data from Tennessee, trying to disentangle what is having an effect on some of these early indicators. So that's to come. But one of the interesting things about Tennessee, and this is something that we encourage states and colleges to think about, is that the guided pathways is kind of an idea. It is a reform. It's also an idea, and at your college, I would encourage you to think about whether you want to call it guided pathways or not. Us at CCRC are not attached to the word. it's what we use to describe this whole college redesign. But what we've found at colleges is that sometimes it's better not to call it guided pathways, because when you call it that, it sounds like kind of the reform du jour. It's, you know, what's happening now, but something else will come later. So Tennessee, what they call it is completion practices. So this, even the colleges in the state don't recognize the term guided pathways when we talk about guided pathways, but instead they focus on these key practices. So mapping all programs and ensuring that these maps include the right math for each course. And this is determined by the right math for each program, and this is determined by the faculty. Redesigning the intake experience to help students explore, choose a major or a meta major, and develop a full program plan. Requiring students with an ACT of 13 to 18 to take a co-rec math that is aligned with the math pathway. So that support class that students are taking is aligned with the college level math. So they've got a statistics learning support course, a math for liberal arts support course, and an algebra support course, so that it's customized for the math pathway. They require students with an ACT below 13 to develop a learning plan, and they give them intensive support. So this is one interesting thing about Tennessee is there's, you know, they've gotten a lot of press and a lot of attention about their co-rec model and how they're at scale across the state. But in many colleges, they did not feel that students with a 13 or below were really ready for the co-rec model. And so a number of colleges developed a standalone course that students would take either over the summer or in their first semester before moving then to either the college level course or into the college level with a support course. So, you know, we always like to think about what percentage of students are getting through college level math and English in 1 year. So even with that standalone course to help the students who are really underprepared or need additional support, they can still get through the college level course in a year, but this way they're able to get them some more intensive support before they move into that college level course. And then across the state, they're really increasing students' exposure to high impact teaching practices. And they're embedding those experiences into their program of study. So one college, for example, Cleveland State, in all their first year experience courses, which students are required to take, and their first year experience courses are aligned to each meta major, the students have to do a service learning, they have a service learning requirement in all of these courses, and the students have to complete it. So it's tied to their area of interest. It's a requirement for their program and for the course. And they write about it as a course assignment, and I believe it goes into a portfolio that they develop as well. All right, so this probably looks familiar. This just shows kind of how far along the Tennessee colleges are in mapping pathways to student end goals. This really focuses on program mapping with aligned math pathways, working to clarify and strengthen paths to transfer and employment, and building more accessible website information. One of the challenges we are seeing in Tennessee, even though they have made progress, is mapping programs to four-year institutions. This is probably a challenge in Michigan as well. But up until 2016 in Tennessee, the community colleges and the 6 regional universities were part of the same system, and they had what they called Tennessee Transfer Pathways, or TTPs. But in 2016, the state passed the Focus Act, and the universities were split off from the community colleges, so they were no longer part of the same system. And now the community colleges are reporting some more challenges with universities accepting courses, and they're uncertain whether the TTPs will be viable pathways moving forward. So as a result, a lot of the programs at the community colleges are developing individual articulation agreements with their partner institutions and are having to deal with transfer issues on a case-by-case basis. So we do recognize this is a challenge and an ongoing challenge, even in a state that is more of a system. As we learn more about some good strategies for doing this, we will certainly share them. What we have found so far is that open communication, faculty talking with each other, developing these individual agreements, and getting them on your website and in students' hands early are important, as are helping students think about where they want to transfer to and what they want to do early, so that so they can help the students map out what their path looks like. So I did want to share a couple examples here of maps. This is a really cool one. This is from Roane State. So at the top you can see, and if you go to their website, you can click down through their focus areas or their meta majors, and you can look through all their maps. But what they include is a day in the life in that career field, as well as important considerations before declaring major, and they include wage and job placement data. So all this is here when you scroll down into a program like dental hygiene, for example. So just to zoom in on this map a little bit, you could see that the maps include the right math course for each program. Critical courses are marked with the key symbol, so that little black key symbol you can see there. Recommended electives, which were selected by program faculty, appear in green, and there's some milestones are identified by month with diamonds at the bottom. So these are things that students should do every semester. Whoops. Not sure. Let's see. Do you still see my slides, Jenny? Something happened on my end. Okay. Hopefully you all can still see this. All right. So they include milestones, critical courses.
Hannah, now I see black.
You see black. Okay. That's not good. Let me.
Probably not. No.
Let me see what I can do. All right. No one can see your screen. Okay, let's see here. How's that?
Now I see it.
Okay, let me just scroll ahead.
While we're looking, someone has asked if we see the slides, if we'd see the slides, and yes, I will. The slides and the recording of the webinar will be made available on our website. I will not email them individually to all of you, but I will make them available on the website, and it should be up in a couple of days.
Great, thanks, Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is one example of a map. I think I have another one here. Yep. So here's transfer. This is transfer teaching degree in elementary education, and again, just zooming in on the map a little bit, you can see.
Can you make it full screen for us?
Oh, it's not. Okay, sorry, I don't know.
I know, I don't know either.
Let me try. Sorry, everyone.
Oh, maybe it's me, actually. Perhaps everyone else does see it in full screen. There we go.
Okay.
Now, I'll mute and shut up.
No worries. Okay, so elementary teaching, the same thing here. The cool thing about their maps is they're directly linked to the college's course catalog and their degree work system so that everyone can see the most up-to-date information on their website. So in DegreeWorks, the maps are used as templates to create students' customized educational plans. And when they update these maps in the catalog, they're updated on the website. So another thing I mentioned that they had developed these, they developed math pathways. So for every program decided which math is the right math. And what we see now across the state is that 64% of students are now taking statistics as their gateway math course. And only, what are we at? 18% of students are taking algebra or a calculus sequence. And this is very different than what it looked like before they implemented math pathways, where the majority of students, definitely more than half, pushing 3/4 of students, were taking algebra calculus. So I'm going to come back to that again a little bit later too. All right, so in the second area, this one really focuses on helping students explore career and program options, choose a program of study, and develop a full program plan, and start taking college level courses in their program and in math and English in the first year. So one of the big, I mentioned earlier about meta majors, and that's not something we emphasized on the scaled adoption assessment, but it is a big part of what colleges are doing. So this is the meta majors, or they're called career communities at Cleveland State, and you can see they have 7 of them. You can click down into each of them and explore all the programs in those areas. It'll show what careers the programs lead to, and more importantly, though, and related to the second area on helping students choose and enter a program of study, the college is really using these career communities to frame the whole onboarding experience for students. So when a student signs up for orientation, they go to an orientation for their career community. Every student is required to take a first-year experience course in their career community, and during that course, they are making an educational plan. It's one of the course requirements. Every student has an assigned success coach that's assigned to their career community, so they're kind of specialists in that area, and that's in addition to having a faculty advisor. So at Cleveland State, they primarily use a faculty advisor model, but they also now have these success coaches who are professional advisors that are tied to each career community. And more recently, the college started organizing their commencement by their career community, and they organize things like career fairs by career community. And one of the interesting things they said is that when doing that, they realized that they weren't really connecting with employers in their area in certain communities. So one of the ones was arts and humanities. They really didn't have a lot of connections with programs in their with careers in their area and employers in their area that students could think about or do internships or think about getting a career in that field. So they've been really trying to beef that up lately. All right, so this is their website, and I would encourage you to go and look through their career communities and all their programs. So then we've got Area 3. So this one really focuses on how colleges are improving advising structures and processes to enable college staff and students to monitor students' progress along their plan. This area also really focuses on students' access to the courses that they need when they need them, and opening up viable pathways for students who are unlikely to be admitted into limited access programs. The big one, of course, is nursing and other healthcare fields. From our work in Tennessee, but also in other states, we've learned that advising redesign is often deferred until colleges have made progress on mapping and onboarding. But we are also seeing a lot of colleges that start with advising, and this is one of the things I'm going to talk about later when we talk about how colleges are managing this change process. And one of the really effective strategies we've seen for colleges that are just starting out and thinking about, all right, how are we going to take on this huge transformational change like pathways? And one of the strategies they're using is really focusing or identifying an area where there is a lot of interest at the college, or kind of an area that's identified as being a kind of a trouble spot for the college. And in a lot of cases, that is advising. So by starting there, they're able to get some more buy-in, get some engagement, and start to get things moving. So early on, we were seeing colleges leave advising to a little bit later, I think in part because that's an area where it does require a lot of resources if you're thinking about hiring new advisors. It's one of the areas that I think it can cost a lot. But at the same time, if you can do it earlier and get some momentum, that also seems to be working. So I'm going to give a couple more examples of colleges that have done that later. All right, but in Tennessee, one of the reasons that they've been able to make progress on helping support advisors monitor their students' progress is because they are helping students make full program educational plans. So when you have a plan, it's a lot easier to follow students' progress and to know when they're off path or on path and whether they're making good progress. Without the plan, it's really difficult to know, and you end up doing a lot of these semester by semester advising for students and just developing next semester's plan, as needed. So in the that packet I showed you earlier, we developed this graphic about rethinking student advising along the path. The right column lists some of the ways that colleges are reconsidering how advising and course scheduling can support students along their plans. The Tennessee colleges are really moving towards more predictable course schedules. Some of them are offering block schedules or 2-day-a-week schedules, developing annual schedules, and scheduling by program rather than by individual courses. But on this graphic, one of the key things is that progress is reframed as being on plan versus off plan, with plans that contain as many credits as possible, rather than thinking about students as being part-time or full-time. Because what we found based on some of our other research is that it's not, most students are not full-time or part-time. It's not that they take the same number of credits every semester, and in fact, it's it changes a lot, and every semester students tend to be taking a different number of courses. So thinking about them as full-time versus part-time is not really the best way to think about it, but rather if the student is on their plan, regardless of whether their plan is a 4-year plan or a 2-year plan, that's fine, but are they on their plan? Because if they have a plan, then it's a lot easier to adjust it as needed. If a student needs to take different courses, or they failed a course, or they want to change their major, then you can develop a new plan. It's just a starting point. We definitely assume that most students' plans will definitely change after they make it in their first semester, but it's a lot easier to change something that is there rather than to kind of be not really knowing what is the plan to begin with. All right, so then the fourth area, ensuring that students are learning. This one highlights how colleges are understanding teaching and learning opportunities within programs, how what students learn align with the transfer and employment requirements, and how program faculty can embed active real-world learning opportunities within their programs. This area remains one for further development, both in Tennessee and our work with colleges across the country. We're trying to determine how to understand the culture of teaching and learning at each college. And for, as researchers, we're trying to figure out what types of questions we can add to get, what types of questions we can ask to get a department or division's kind of reflective practices, their processes for continuous improvement, and a sense of program cohesion. So how courses add up to a program. So this is an area where we're definitely struggling. When we talk a lot about program learning outcomes and program learning outcomes assessment, that does get tied up in accreditation activities for many colleges. So this is an area where we're trying to kind of think about what questions to ask, how to better get at whether students are learning across a program and how faculty are assessing that, and how they're using the results of those assessments to either make changes to programs, to pedagogy, to course content, to things like that. All right. And as I mentioned, Tennessee is really focused on high impact practices, and as a system, they've emphasized things like first-year seminar courses, learning communities, undergraduate research opportunities, work-based learning. But as I mentioned earlier, in many cases, these high impact practices are part of program pathways. And so, which is really key, because we want to make sure that these are experiences students are having and not something that they're just sort of opting into. If they, happen to wander into a service learning office, or it happens to be part of their course, but really something that's happening for all students. All right, so this is all on their website if you wanted to explore that. So, how do we know that this is working? People always ask, what is the evidence? We do spend most of our time, or so far at least, looking at these shorter term outcomes, because we're interested in, change in improvement. We look at these strictly for improvement purposes, not for accountability or anything like that. What we have found is that when colleges do make some big changes to practice, we do see some big changes in the KPIs. Of course, it doesn't always work out that way, but sometimes it does. So some of the Gateway course completion KPIs we look at is the ones on this screen talks about completed college English in their first year, completed college math in their first year, and completed both. So you can see here in 2015, when these practices in the CORECs were implemented at scale in Tennessee, there was a pretty big jump. So from 43% to 63% in English, and from 18 to 45% in math. And this is just completion of Gateway course with Gateway courses within their first year. So one of the things we're trying to dig into now more is to disaggregate these data and try to understand, well, all right, so this is for all students. These are, these KPIs are purely descriptive. So let's at least start disaggregating these by age and by race. Unfortunately, with the Tennessee data we don't have any income data, so we can look at it by age and race. So here we're looking at 3 groups of students, the 18 to 19-year-olds. So these are the first time in college students for the most part, 20 to 24-year-olds, and then 25 and older. And you can see, which groups seem to be responding maybe best to some of these COREC options, in particular the younger students. Though even with students 25 and older, the outcomes have improved over time. So from 40% of students over the age of 25 completing Gateway English in their first year to 47%. And when we look at this by race, this is again for English, you can see here some promising closing of some equity or achievement gaps. But still, you do see a 10% gap between white students and Black students. So improvements are good, but it's not going quite far enough yet. If we look at math again by age, so here the gaps are pretty much holding steady across the groups, and we look at college math by race, you can see again the lines are sort of moving in perpendicular. So while moving from 6% to 32% of Black students completing college math in a year is great, there's still 17 percentage points below the percentage of white students who are completing these courses. So progress, but we're still trying to understand why is this happening and what can we do to further close these gaps. And then I'll send you these slides. These are also in our report, so you can look at them in more detail later. But the other ones we look at a lot are these first term and first year credit momentum KPIs. So this is how many students are earning 6 or more college credits in their first term, 12 or more in their first term, and attempted 15 or more in their first term. So some big improvements here, and this is for the first year credit momentum KPIs. So again, you can see for the percentage of students who earned 30 or more college credits in their first year, it went from 3% to 6%. So it's doubled if you want to think about it that way, but still 6% is not great. But you can also see that the percentage of students attempting 30 credits has gone up. But when you look then at attempted 30 credits and completed college 30 credits, there's a gap there. So these are useful, they're interesting. As I said before, we're trying to disentangle what is going on here, and we hope to have some more research out on this soon. So I'm going to spin through the next couple slides because these are similar. They're also on these KPIs, and you can look at them in more depth later on. But what I do here is break out the earn 12 or more credits in the first term by age and race, and earn 24 or more college credits in their first year by age and by race. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about Ohio, just to give you another example of a state where some cool things are happening and give you some ideas on some colleges maybe you could talk to, or some ideas that might be useful for you moving forward. So in Ohio, we also do the scaled adoption assessment with them, and we have seen some big improvements, as you can see here, in the percentage of students who are, sorry, not the percentage of students, I was in KPI land. How many colleges are implementing these practices at scale or moving towards scale? So since 2016, the colleges have made a lot of progress mapping their program pathways, including determining the appropriate math course, again, for each program. And they've also advanced efforts to present information on programs, careers, and transfer opportunities on their websites as well. So a couple examples of some good program maps we saw in Ohio. This one is Edison State. And here, this is for cybersecurity. You can see they have some program outcomes at the bottom of the page. And then you've got their program maps, which are by semester. And they've got some minimum grades for some of the key courses in their programs. And they also have what they call tips for success. So these are kind of like Roan State's milestones, but it's like things students should need to remember to do at a certain point in their career. And some of them are kind of just general, like, apply for scholarships, or, make your schedule for the next semester. And some of them are more program specific. So for example, here you can see students must submit successful background check for CIT 2375 or 237S. So some of them are much more program specific, which I think is really useful. Another example is from North Central State. And here you can see, I'm just going to point out here, I know I sound like I'm obsessed with math courses in programs, but here you can see they've identified that probability and statistics is the right math course for this human services program. And meanwhile, if we look over here at engineering technology, they've got a technical math course. So they've got these on their program maps. They have, again, at North Central State, like at some of the Tennessee or like at all the Tennessee colleges, they have aligned the learning support or the COREC course to the math pathway, which is really great. And we have seen at North Central State some big improvements in their completion of college level math in their first year. So it seems like they're doing something right at North Central State. I know in Michigan you've got the Michigan Transfer Pathways Project, which is identifying courses, including the right math pathway courses for the first 2 years in some of the most popular majors. So I think, these colleges have developed some good strategies for figuring out how to do this. Some of them send out surveys to faculty to try to get out like what skills and math knowledge do students need, and then the math faculty work with them to help identify which math course is the right math course, and then developing the aligned COREC courses. So there's a lot of great ideas that are out there. I'm happy to connect you with colleges that are doing this work as well. Let's see here. Oh, and then for meta majors, a lot of the colleges in Ohio have made a lot of progress here. So as of spring 2018, a lot of them have developed meta majors, which no one actually calls meta majors, which is, I think, good. I think meta majors is kind of a weird name that doesn't make sense to students, but most of the colleges call them things like areas of study or career and academic pathways, sometimes just career pathways, career communities, career clusters, programs of study, or program areas. So a lot of different names out there. I was recently actually talking to some California colleges, and they were trying to come up with some creative names for their meta majors. And I think my favorite one that I heard so far is they developed one called Earth, Wind, and Fire, which I thought was pretty creative. And I think the faculty had fun coming up with some of those names. But some good websites. Edison, which I just showed you, has a great website. Columbus State, which I'm showing you here, also recently relaunched a new website that's reorganized around their meta majors. And who else? Oh, Sinclair Community College is great. So this is a good example of their career communities here. You can see them by color. And then when you click down into the program, so if we click down into the business and IT career community, and then we click into the business administration program, a couple things. I know this is really hard to see here, but you can look at it later when you have the slides. So they identify their program outcomes, which is great. They've got transfer information for students about where this program transfers to. They've got map options, so they do include full program that you can get a full-time map and a part-time map. And then the map, and there's maps and then links to the course syllabi and course schedules, so students can see what the course requirements are, and see the syllabi and when the course is going to be offered. So in the second area here, again, I'm just going to go through this quickly. Colleges are really rethinking the onboarding process. And this has been a big area of focus for the Ohio colleges, and increasingly we're thinking that this is a really important area in general for Pathways. And Pathways isn't supposed to be about program maps, but really about helping students explore and choose a program of study and develop a full program plan. And the plans are customized versions of the maps, but the maps, as I'm sure you've all realized, really don't work for most students because they're full-time. Students come in with transfer credits or dual enrollment credits, or they don't want to take 15 credits a semester. So really every student does need a customized version of it, and that's really a focus. So the maps are great, but one of the things we've been encouraging colleges to not do is to not spend forever making the maps. So making the maps should probably not be like a 2 or 3 year process, because like I said, every student is going to need a customized version of the map anyways. But it's a great way to come together and to figure out, what does our program mean? What does our program entail? What will students learn? What courses will we use to teach them these things? And to really put a program together. and then use those maps to help students develop their plan. So at Cuyahoga Community College, Tri-C, which is in Cleveland, their counselors help students develop an initial 1 or 2 semester plan during orientation. And then they all go to new student at convocation, where students are grouped by their pathway, which is what they call their meta majors. And they speak to faculty members about programs in that pathway and possible careers. Then in their first semester, new students take a student success course or first year experience course, and they confirm the plan that they developed at orientation. So by the end of the fall semester, students' spring schedules are locked, and in the second semester, students take another success course that is organized by their pathway and is taught by an instructor from that pathway. And the goal of the second semester student success course is to conduct further career exploration and to develop a locked-in plan for the rest of their time at the college. And they use DegreeWorks to do that, but of course there's a number of different options of programs you can use to help students make their plans. And so then here, this is just some statewide data from Ohio, so across all 23 colleges, sorry. But you can see they've engaged in a lot of kind of DevEd reforms and math pathways in Ohio. So they also had a math pathways initiative, and the Ohio Department of Higher Education and the OACC have been leading some co-rec work in the state. And you can see that there have been some improvements in the percentage of students across all the community colleges who are passing Gateway Math and English in their first year. So that's promising. And then for the third area, so we've got keeping students on the path. Many colleges are developing new processes and policies around advising, including reorganizing advising, figuring out new ways to, figuring out how students are assigned to advisors and how often students are required to meet with their advisors. So at a lot of colleges, they're trying to move to a case management model, but of course this is difficult, especially when caseloads are high. So what other colleges are doing are thinking about kind of a stage system where maybe a student has a success coach or a professional advisor in their first semester or two, and then they're transitioned to a faculty advisor who's in their program or at least in their meta major. And another thing we've seen is, when you've got advisors who are assigned to meta majors or programs and faculty who are taking on new advising roles, or maybe they're not new, but maybe they're a little more formalized. They're spending more time talking to each other, and they know each other better, and students notice this too when the faculty know the advisors and the advisors know the faculty. The students report that it's kind of reassuring that everyone knows each other. They feel like they're getting good information and not just being sent around to kind of random people. So again, this is the same graphic that I had before, but it's I think, again, not to harp on this, but the on plan, off plan, I think is a really useful way of thinking about students' progress, because if they're off plan for a reason, and that's a good way to spark a conversation, and also reaffirms their progress at the college, and acknowledges their own timeline to completion. So it's not that every student has to take 15 credits a semester. It's just not reasonable that you can expect every student to be able to do that. So if they have a plan, if it's a 4-year plan or a 2-year plan, great, but let's just make sure that they're staying on their plan. All right, so I'm going to move forward a little bit. I'm not going to go through the fourth area for Ohio. I think I don't think that'll be as useful as talking a little bit about the change process. So this is some of the new stuff that we're learning, and I'm just going to share some of it, and happy to take any questions if you have any. And again, we are going to be releasing some new reports on this this spring, so this is kind of hot off the press, and we're still figuring it out. So with all those caveats, I'm just going to jump into some of these things. But practice-wise, so this is still a little bit about the what. So where to begin for if you're just thinking about, all right, what are the main practices that we want to focus on? I think the big ones are organizing programs into career and academic focused meta majors, and evaluating whether each program leads to either a job in a related field and transfer with junior standing. Identifying the right math is really important, and then examining the new student intake process and figuring out how it helps students explore programs and develop a full program plan, ideally by the end of the first term or the first year. And then another big thing is identifying those critical intro courses for each meta major and each program, and thinking about how faculty can strengthen teaching in those courses, and to start to think about what kind of hands-on or applied learning opportunities could be included in those programs. So now in terms of more of the change management-y things, so as I said, we visited 9 colleges this fall, and we were trying to learn more about how they manage this change process. So, you know, this goes to how they laid the groundwork for change, how they kind of educated people about pathways and got them thinking about the problems that they were trying to address, how they engaged people, so how you got people to collaborate more on designing and implementing some of these practices, and then how are colleges that are farther along, how are they starting to institutionalize these changes and just make it part of their new way of doing business. So I'm going to pose this to you as kind of questions to think about as you're starting this work, or if you've been in it for a couple years. I think these are still good and useful questions to ask, because what we found is that colleges that can answer these questions and have they can explain what they're doing to address these questions are making some good progress in implementing pathways. So this first question I would pose to you is, in what ways is your college prioritizing student success and communicating why the college is taking on this work? So I realize that, you know, people have been talking about student success for a really long time, and everyone says student success, and we are all focused on student success. But I would say, you know, how are you communicating that the college is focused on student success to faculty, to advisors, and to the entire college community? Is it in your strategic plan? Is it in the mission? How do you know that you're focusing and prioritizing student success? One of the colleges we visited said, you know, we started to realize that we weren't student centered. What we were was student interested. So we did care about students. We certainly cared about students, but, you know, they weren't what was driving our decision. So their success wasn't what was our #1 priority all the time. So they changed their college mission. They're placing student success first and as the priority when they're making decisions about how they're going to design and implement new practices in order to support student success. Another way that another college has been going through a lot of, they've been going through contract negotiations with faculty for several years now. And despite that, they have made a lot of progress on implementing all these guided pathways practices, because the negotiations are ongoing, they've been ongoing, but the college and the senior leadership and the faculty both decided to prioritize student success, and they realized that they had a student success problem, and they prioritized it over, you know, these negotiations, which they knew would keep on going, but they wanted to move forward and be able to take steps to address student success even while that was happening. Another college, they were kind of a big multi-campus college that was kind of doing its own thing, and the campuses were often competing with each other for students. What they decided to do was they moved towards more of a one college mentality, and that was an important step for them, because they were placing the students first. They were just one college now. They weren't 5 separate campuses competing for students, but they were one college, and they were going to address student success that way. So I would say this is a useful question to ask yourself. How are you prioritizing student success, and how are you communicating why the college is taking on this work? So being able to explain why this is a priority. And, you know, one of the other things colleges are doing in this area, and this is kind of about laying the groundwork for change, is most colleges have been involved in achieving the dream, and through that they learn to collect and use and analyze data. And that's also an important way and an important kind of foundation for prioritizing student success, because then you can identify where the problems are. All right, so that's one question I would pose. A second one is, in what ways is the college planning to pace the change process and involve the college community? So we found that this is really important, kind of setting the stage for people at the college about what is going to happen when we're taking on this work, and how are we going to pace this so we don't burn people out, and how are we going to involve people in this work. And it's important both to explain in many cases that this wasn't going to be a rushed thing, like the college was going to take its time to have discussions, to talk about the changes, to plan it out, to maybe pilot things, to implement them. It just wasn't going to get all done at once. One college explained that they were very intentional. The leadership team was very intentional about explaining to the college community that they were going to phase this in. They weren't going to go all in. It was going to be a phased in process, and that faculty and advisors would have a very big and important role in the redesign process. So even before they started implementing new things, just setting the stage and reassuring people that, reassuring and showing people that they were going to have a role in this. Another college made it very clear that they were going to be allowing time for deliberation. They wouldn't be rushing into things. And then another big thing for several colleges we talked to was affirming faculty ownership of programs. So, we're talking about program mapping, and sometimes it's not clear entirely what that means, and who's going to be responsible for that. So just affirming the faculty ownership of programs was very important at many colleges. Another strategy colleges took on were, like I said, identifying a common area of interest. So even before, again, the implementation and the planning process starts, having the leadership team, faculty, advisors, the whole college community figuring out and giving their input on what is our big priority as a college, and then starting there. So again, I'm thinking of two colleges we visited this fall, Community College of Philadelphia and Lynn Benton Community College out in Oregon. They both had for a while, like the faculty, the advisors, the leadership, everyone felt like advising was not good enough at their college. So that's where they decided to start. So at CCP in Philly, they hired a bunch of new advisors. They had a faculty advisor model there for a long time, but they decided to hire, I think they've hired now 12 new advisors. This has been over 3 years or so. So every year they've hired a couple more. They're professional advisors, but they are part of the faculty union, so they're technically faculty members, and they have developed a close relationship with the faculty in the meta majors that they're assigned to. So that was a useful strategy for CCP, and Lynn Benton had a similar thing. What the faculty told us was that for years they had known that advising was not good enough, and they conveyed this, had been talking to the senior leadership about this for several years. And so when this all started, it was kind of mutually decided that this is where they were going to put a lot of their energy early on. And then one of the other strategies I liked at another college, this was at San Jacinto College in Texas, was that they made it abundantly clear that, I'm talking about the leadership and even at the dean level, they made it clear that they wanted people to take risks, and that this was a safe space to innovate, and that they knew that it wasn't going to always work out the first time, and that errors were okay, changing the plan was okay, but they wanted people to think outside the box. Going back to Lynn Benton again, they had some cool ideas and structures for doing this. They developed what they called the Wild Thinkers Forum, where the president charged them with just coming up with any idea they could think of to address certain problems, and trying not to be constrained by by money or by institutional norms or any of these things. Just thinking, ideally, what would we do to address a problem? And what that's evolved to is now the college having what they call innovation councils. So on a variety of topics, mapping, onboarding, they've got these innovation councils where the president has tasked them with coming up with what he called 99 dumb ideas, just to get people thinking outside the box and thinking creatively about the issues they're trying to solve. And then the third question is, in what ways is the college bringing together people who might not typically work together to implement specific reforms or practices? So this is a big one we've noticed. The engagement or the implementation process, it has to be collaborative. And what we've seen at some effective colleges is that at this stage, when they're really starting to get into the weeds on planning and implementing new practices, they're bringing together people who haven't really talked before. So whether that's CTE faculty and faculty in more transferring programs, whether that's advisors and faculty, whether it's credit and non-credit faculty, student affairs and academic affairs, but they're bringing them together to do things like thinking about mapping or thinking about the onboarding and how they're going to redesign the intake experience or the first year experience course, rethinking how advising is structured so that someone is monitoring students' progress along their plan and knows when they're off plan. So that's been really exciting to see, and I think in this area it's important to think about how can we bring people together who haven't really collaborated before and haven't really talked before in some cases. And then finally, this gets to institutionalizing practices, but you know, an important question to ask yourself is, in what ways is the college building in sufficient time for reflection? And so by that, I mean taking time to pause, to think, to reflect and regroup, and also to celebrate the successes that you've had and to plan next steps. So we've seen this be very, very important. One of the best examples I saw of this fall was at Wallace State Community College down in Alabama, and their president implemented for this academic year, what she's calling the Year of Reflection. So this was a year where she said she was going to sit on her hands and not introduce any new ideas or new practices, but they were going to take the year to kind of reflect on what they'd accomplished, to take stock of the things that they've implemented, and to kind of take some thinking time to figure out what was working, what might need to be tweaked, and where they were going to go next. So I thought that was a really smart way of building in some time to just pause and regroup and figure out where you're going next, because this is a lot of work and it is hard work. So one of the ways we were thinking about might be really useful to think through this, you know, to take some time and to do some of this reflection, is to think about a timeline. And this might be something, especially for the mentor colleges, if you've been doing this for a while now, to map out what you've done. And you can think about it and you can use it, you know, this timeline if this is helpful, but just map out, you know, what have you done, even going back like maybe 10 years, if you joined ATD or Foundations for Excellence or any of the roadmap from AAC&U, any of these projects, and how they help, what did you learn from them, and how did they help lead you where you are today? And then looking back at any, you know, mapping or first year experience courses and just trying to map this out and look at everything that you've accomplished. We got this one from the University of Hawaii Community College Student Success Evolution. They mapped it out, and, you know, because in part it was useful just to look at everything they'd accomplished and then thinking about, all right, so maybe there's some things we did early on we need to revisit, or where are we going next? So I would encourage you maybe to think about it in this way. All right, so I am almost out of time, sadly, but I do want to spend a couple minutes talking about the scale of adoption assessment. And I'm sorry to rush through this. I guess I had too many slides. But Jenny, I'm happy to take any questions or stay on a little bit later if people want.
Go ahead and take your time, Hannah. Okay. You know, we are recording if you have to jump off for another obligation, but we'll just go ahead and let Hannah finish, and I think that's fine. I think that.
Okay, cool, thanks. All right, so the scale of adoption assessment, I know for some of you it's going to be the first time you're doing it, and for some of you, well, probably most of you have done it before. We did make a couple changes to it, so I want to talk through that briefly. The main addition, the practices are almost all the same as the ones that you filled out before. What we did as this year was what we called equity considerations. So in each of the 4 areas, the mapping pathways to student end goals, helping students choose and enter a path, keep them on the path, and ensuring that they're learning. At the top of each section, we added what we're calling equity considerations. So these are things, questions related to how the college is trying to close equity gaps and to do so using some of these practices. So I would encourage you to, read through these equity questions and think about them in the context of these practices. You could include information about how you're addressing them in the boxes that are on the scale of adoption assessment. You could answer them at the top, or, a lot of these questions probably aren't answerable, but our hope was that they would provide some good talking points, some conversations at the college to get yourself thinking about, all right, so we do want to, we're reforming the institution, but how are we ensuring that these practices aren't sustaining equity or achievement gaps, but are actually trying to close those gaps? So you'll notice those in all the areas. So for the second area, it really gets at the onboarding process and thinking about and critically examining how the onboarding process may be pushing some students into certain programs and thinking about what can be done about that. For area 3, thinking about how the institution can support advisors to incorporate engaging, proactive, and culturally relevant advising practices to better support underrepresented student success in their programs. So things like that, again, these questions might not all be answerable, and that's fine. The idea isn't that you'll actually, that you have to address all these questions in here, but that they'll be useful conversation starters. And if there are things you're doing or, maybe next steps that you want to include, I would encourage you to do that. So that's the scale of adoption assessment and the main change that you'll see this time around. And then this is pretty much the same as last time. We do encourage the states that are using the SOAA to follow this 6-step process. So I do think it's useful for whoever you decide at your college will complete the SOA to review all the practices again. And if you have the one that you submitted last time, I think it's useful to go back and examine that. And to think about, what progress has the college made and where do you currently stand in terms of scaling these practices? I will say one of the interesting things that we've learned and observed in some of the states that we're working with who are using this assessment is that oftentimes the second or even the third time a college takes it, they've actually downgraded their ratings a little bit. So maybe they thought they were scaling in progress last time, and this time they're actually planning to scale. And the reason we tried to understand what was happening, because we definitely don't want to see colleges, not making progress or going backwards. But what we actually learned was that over time, the colleges were learning more about what the practices entailed and what it actually means to scale up something so that it's happening for all students in all programs of study, and that it's inescapable or unavoidable. And so, by learning more about what was entailed, they actually realized that they had more work to do. So that was a really cool thing to see, and just, colleges taking this work really seriously and thinking critically about, what does it actually mean to be at scale, and are we actually as far along as we thought we are? So I would encourage you to look at what you did last time and, kind of think about it in that way. I'm sure in a lot of areas you've made a lot of progress, but maybe there's some areas where you have a better understanding of, what it really entails, and, the rating might change. And I would also emphasize that, the ratings are, these are big squishy categories. Planning to scale, I mean, I feel like you could be planning for several years. Scaling in progress, these are big categories. Pick the one that you think is the best fit. When Jenny does the calls with you, she'll dig in and try to understand more about what you're doing. And really for us, when CCRC uses this assessment with colleges and states that we work with, and I've encouraged this in the the student success centers that I've worked with on this as well, is really the most useful data comes from the conversations that they have with the college teams and from the information that you provide in the text boxes. That really is helpful, because the idea of this is that it's a planning document for you, but then it's also useful to the state and to places like CCRC to try to figure out what are some common areas of progress and what are some areas of challenges, and to use that information to plan support over the next year. So the ratings are, we do track the ratings and they are good to know, but really, the most useful information does come from the calls and from those text boxes. So after individuals kind of review it, I would encourage you to put together a team to complete it as a group, to walk through how far along you think you are and what your next steps are. And you can add additional, columns or whatever to the assessment if that's useful. Some colleges have added in a column that has where they indicate who's going to be primarily responsible or what offices are going to be involved. To really turn this into a planning document and something you can go back to. So after you complete it, you'll be turning it in, and then Jenny will be doing these follow-up calls. I believe those will be happening in late March and early April. And then after that, she'll be summarizing the data and reporting it back to you, what the overall findings are for the colleges that completed it, and then using that information to design coaching and workshops and technical assistant activities to support the scaled implementation of these practices. So here's a list of some of the people we think should probably be included in any team that completes this assessment. Some of the obvious ones are the Chief Academic Officer, so the VPAA or the Provost, Chief Student Affairs Officer. We think it would be helpful if your college has a Chief Equity or Diversity Officer to include that person, especially with the new equity considerations included. We would encourage you to include several deans and faculty members from different divisions in different areas, as well as someone from the registrar, IT, IR, financial aid, director of advising, so someone who's kind of oversees advising, and then I would include some advisors or success coaches or counselors themselves, since they're on the ground and might have a unique perspective on the progress to date in terms of implementing some of these things. And then some questions to consider as you're completing the SOA. So in the third column, it asks your progress to date. So what is the college currently doing related to each practice? And importantly, which students and in which programs and when are currently affected? So this gets at scale, and it's a good way to think about, like, if you think you're at scale, really examining, all right, well, how do we know that all students are currently affected by this practice? And then what people or departments within the college are currently doing this practice? And then as you're moving into planning and thinking about the timeline and next steps, all right, so now we know who's kind of doing things, but who should be involved in the planning and designing and implementing of practices? Are there people who should be involved that currently aren't? And which external partners, so from universities or from high schools, employers, should be engaged in the planning, design, and implementation process? So thinking outside the college to think about some of your most important partners, and are there areas where you should involve them in some of this implementation? And then I think it would be useful for the college to think about, but also to share with Jenny about the resources and support that you could use to move the practices forward. Things, it's useful to think about what all resources and all support you could use. I mean, are there specific areas that you're really focused on, or is it advising or intake? And what would really help you move this work forward? So that is all I have. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen in today. It was a pleasure talking with all of you. I will send Jenny the slides so she can send them out to you, and I'll include my email address. And if you do have any questions, you can also feel free to reach out to me. So thanks, Jenny. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Hannah. This was fantastic. A lot of good information. We will make the recording of the webinar and the slides available on our website within probably, I would say, by early next week. Hopefully we'll get those up. And I appreciate your time and attention. I think this is going to help all of us as we go forward, continuing to work on guided pathways. So now I would like to invite everyone to stay warm and safe as the temperature drops again here in Michigan. Travel safely, and Hannah, thank you again.
Thank you.